we did a segment on Michigan and Ohio State, and it wasn't really a segment that it was built typically. Typically, I got a thought map that I go through, and I got a few extending points that build off a main point. Well, this last show, I had like 5 or 6, it was kind of a fragmented segment. I had 5 or 6 things that I just felt like talking about, and they all had to do with Michigan or Ohio State. So I just kind of did a hodgepodge of points about Michigan or Ohio State. Put the video up, it did really good numbers. But then I was looking in the comment section, because I read all your comments too. And there were some Penn State folks that came in the comment section and said, why are you talking about Michigan so much? Like, we get you talking about Ohio State. What are you talking about Michigan so much? We're closer than Michigan. We've been more competitive with this Ohio State team than Michigan has. And we are a more dangerous threat to them this year than Michigan is. And I thought about it, and they were right. We've been ignoring Penn State. I don't know why, but we've been sleeping on Penn State. So it looks like James Franklin, if you're watching the video version, is scolding us right now, and with good reason. So we've done all these segments about Ohio State and Michigan, and we're going to keep talking about the Buckeyes. Michigan got a big commitment today from Junior Colson right here. When I say in our backyard, right here in our backyard. Lives like 2 minutes from the building. So congratulations to Michigan, but we got to talk some Penn State, because you're right. I've overlooked them. This team, I mean, this program, I don't need to go down, the website's official stat sheet for you, but I mean, they've won 11 games, 3 out of the last 4 years. They won the Big Ten back in 2016, which was, I think, the 3rd year of James Franklin's 2nd or 3rd year there. But then you extend it to recruiting. And I'm just talking about the blueprint of what makes an elite program here, or at least a very good program. They've been top 15 every year since then. They, I think most importantly, have repaired their image from the scandal a few years ago to the point, at least as far as I can tell, where when we talk about Penn State, we're less than a decade removed from that garbage. And when we talk about Penn State, that's not at the forefront of my mind anymore. I don't know how your mind works. That's not at the forefront of my mind anymore, and I deal with college athletics 24/7, 365. So I feel pretty qualified to talk on it. That's my personal stance, and that's not by accident. They've done an exceptional job of repairing their image from what a few people did to their image. I mean, the vast majority were, not complicit in any of that. So they've done a really good job there. And so they've been you're right, they've been extremely competitive with Ohio State. I thought I had the stat in my head, and I was right, but I had to go back and look. The last 3 years, they've been beaten by, I want to say it was 1 point, 1 point, and 8 points or something like that. 13. It's a 13-point total gap over the past 3 games combined against Ohio State. So why in the world is it? Because then I started thinking about perception, and to make sure I wasn't crazy, I started texting some folks. And I said, when you think of the Big Ten, what's the hierarchy there? And there were some folks that said Ohio State, Penn State, but most of them did say Ohio State, Michigan. So I thought, why? Why is that? Here's the best reasoning I could come up with. The best reasoning I could come up with is, first you could look at the head-to-head of Penn State, Michigan, and you can see that Nittany Lions, they've still dropped 4 of the last 6 in that series. If you had dominated Michigan, I think it may be a little bit different here. They have lost the last 3 to Ohio State. Regardless of what the margins were, they have lost the last 3. So I don't think, because it's a what have you done for me today and yesterday kind of mentality right now, people don't view them as being on the same plane as Ohio State. And they view them, I think, as comparable to Michigan. And the fact of the matter is, outside of Pennsylvania and outside of certain pockets in Big Ten country, if all things are equal or close to equal, the conversation is going to revert default style to Ohio State and then the and is going to be filled with Michigan. You got to make people, as far as I can tell, down here outside of the Big Ten, you got to make people look away from Michigan. I think they're fully capable of doing that this year. So then that fast forwards us to 2020 and beyond. And I can't help, I'm going to say something here, and then I'm going to tell you what I didn't say. That's one of our approaches on the show. Make a statement, and then quickly, before you even get done in the comment section, tell you what I didn't say. Penn State reminds me of Clemson a little bit. Here's what I didn't say. What I didn't say is they're comparable to Clemson right now. I didn't say they're on par with Clemson. I didn't say that I'm picking them to win a national championship 2 out of the next 3 years, nothing like that. Also, I did not tell you that James Franklin is comparable or equal to or greater than Dabo Swinney, but here's what I do see. What I do see and what I remember about Clemson is I believe it was third year for Dabo. He won the conference there, and James Franklin won one very early on, first 3 years of his tenure at Penn State. But yet, no one really perceived them as having arrived nationally. I don't think. I remember that was the way it was for Clemson. And so remember the world you're living in. You're living in a world where someone can take over a program, having never been a head coach before, like Kirby Smart at Georgia, and take him to a national championship the second year. Like Gus Malzahn took over Auburn, and in the first year he was there, they were in the national championship game. Ryan Day has taken over Ohio State, obviously, seamless transition right to the playoff. Lincoln Riley took over Oklahoma, playoffs virtually every year. And so if you don't take over a program and immediately turn it into a playoff contender, then people sort of tend to put you on the back burner. They don't put you on the hot seat necessarily, but they put you on the back burner. And that's kind of how I feel Dabo was early on. Now, they eventually got there, and that's what I'm kind of leading to. They eventually got there, but it wasn't this immediate seismographic spike on a radar. It was, give us a little while, got to get over that Florida State hump, got to get over a hump of thinking we're there, but then we get pasted in a game and we're not there yet. But then when we finally do get there, we are there. That may be the same kind of trajectory that James Franklin has Penn State on. Here's the big difference. Once they got Florida State out of the way, and I'm talking about Clemson. Once Clemson got Florida State out of the way, and Florida State did a half-decent job of getting themselves out of the way, if we're being honest, but credit to Dabo and Clemson for taking full advantage of it. Once they got them out of the way, there was nothing else standing in the way. There is a giant standing in the way. There are a couple of them up there, but there is one notable giant standing in the way of Penn State. And that's the difference between the setup, one of at least, the differences between the setup that Dabo Swinney had at Clemson and James Franklin has here. They also remind me in some ways of Notre Dame. And the way they remind me of Notre Dame right now, and I'm speaking specifically as an outsider, not a fan of these programs, not someone who grew up around them, trying to give you an outside perspective. Notre Dame, I was talking to Brian Kelly when we did the interview with him for Social Distance a couple of 3 weeks ago, and you're looking at their resume. And if you just kind of did a blind resume test and you looked at the fact that they're a double-digit win team 4 out of the last 5 years, they're recruiting at a level consistently now, the likes of which they haven't in a very long time. They've been there. They've been to the playoffs a couple times, been to the playoff in a national championship game a couple times the last decade. But since they haven't won one, and since they've never stepped on the field with those elite teams and been viewed really as the equal of those teams, in other words, it's going to take a few bounces of the ball to go their way, and they're going to have to win the turnover battle by +2, but they can get it done, but they're going to need some help. That's kind of the way you feel when Notre Dame's on the field with an elite team, and that's probably the way you feel when Penn State plays Ohio State. They may not feel that way, but probably outsiders feel that way. How do you elevate your program? Well, you elevate it through developing and recruiting, but like Notre Dame, and I said this about Notre Dame, I'll say it with Penn State. I'll say the same thing with Michigan. All these programs. I know you've thrown Taj Boyd in my face if you're a Clemson fan, but I'll maintain my stance. It was when Deshaun Watson walked in the door at Clemson that all of a sudden they went from a cute ACC story that's going to, run into a Mack truck if they ever make it to the playoffs to a team that could really compete for a national championship, and then a team that can win a national championship. And then once they win the national championship and you see superstar quarterback play, then there's this stream of talent. Clemson wasn't recruiting top 5 classes before that. They certainly are now. And they've had this steady incline, and the trajectory's been steadily pointed upwards of recruiting, of development. Facilities are great. I'm not saying you lack facilities or anything like that at Penn State, but what happens if that occurs? Same kind of quarterback dynamic. What happens if that finally occurs at Penn State? Because it hasn't yet. You thought Hackenberg was going to be that? He wasn't. What if it does happen there? That's what I always wait on. With a program like Michigan, program like Penn State, program like Notre Dame, I wait for either a superstar quarterback to be recruited by them and choose them, or I wait for maybe a high 4-star kind that they do land to blossom once they get there and get developed, and it's just you catch lightning in a bottle, and boom. Once that happens, program takes off, And that's kind of the trampoline bounce that you need to get into that top tier. And once you're there, it's like watching that Ninja Warrior show. You know, you jump and you grab onto the monkey bars, but once you got them, you got them. And then you pull yourself up, and then you're there. That could be Penn State. You know, we are Penn State. You could be. That could be Penn State. And I pull for it, just like I told you the other day, get accusations of homerism and bias all the time. I just root for the big-time teams to be good. And I get berated for it all the time by our G5 brethren, but sue me. I pull for the big-time brand name programs to be good. I remember when did you guys do that home and home with Bama? It was like 2010, 11 or something like that. I remember that was scheduled so far in advance. So I remember being in high school in the early 2000s and looking at all the future college football schedules. And I didn't know who the Alabama coach was going to be. Obviously, I didn't know it was going to be Nick Saban, but I knew it was Joe Paterno. And you guys know I grew up very much a college football fan in general, and I always thought to myself, like, that's the only shot I'm going to get at seeing Joe Paterno coach. So if the time comes and I can afford tickets to that game, I'm going. So the time came and I got to go. And as it turns out, I got to see Paterno and Saban coach. So stands to reason I have full respect for the brand and the program there. And I look at the helmet grid schedule for this year, pulled one up for the Big Ten today. And that October 24th date, Ohio State and Penn State, sure does look tempting, especially because it is, to me, it's the game of the week that week. Now, I may not get to experience your full game day atmosphere. Never been to a Penn State game. And I'd love to experience a night game, whiteout, etc. But I just love to go to Beaver Stadium, honestly. We'll see if we can make that happen.